All right, good evening. My name is Don Kudo. I'm the county engineer for Wellington County. I'd like to welcome all of you to this online community meeting for the Roadmaster Action Plan, otherwise known as the Roadmap or RMAP study. This is the first time the county has hosted a meeting of this sort, as typically we would be meeting with you, the public, in person at an open house. So the county does appreciate your attendance and participation in this online meeting format. In addition to myself from the county, we do have a few county staff in attendance. Joe DeConing, who's our manager of roads, Pasquale Costanzo, technical services supervisor, and Emily Gomans, engineering services administrative assistant. Plus we have our consultant team from Dillon consulting on this meeting as well. At this time, I would also like to recognize the county councilors who are attending this meeting. Roads Committee Chair, County Councilor, and Wellington North Mayor Andy Lennox, Councilor Mary Lloyd, Councilor Jeff Duncan, Councilor Diane Ballantyne, Councilor Don McKay, and Councilor Steve O'Neill. Those are the councilors that pre-registered for this meeting. If there's any, I apologize. So the county has hired the engineering consultant firm Dillon Consulting to undertake this transportation plan. We'll turn it over to the Dillon team to go over the agenda for this.
Great, thank you, Don. Good afternoon and welcome to the Wellington Master Action Plan online community meeting. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Zara Jaffer. I'm a planner and engagement specialist with Dillon Consulting Limited, and I'll be your facilitator for this evening. Please note that the meeting is being recorded and the presentation portion will be shared on the project website after the meeting. So if you are able to only join us for a portion of it, or you would like to view the meeting recording afterwards, that will be available for you. Our agenda for tonight includes a presentation, which will provide a bit of an overview to the project and some of the key outcomes to date. And then we'll have a bit of a Q&A, which will have the opportunity to take the questions that were submitted via the registration, as well as any questions that you'd like to submit during this meeting via the chat. We will also have the opportunity, if you would like to speak and ask your question verbally during the Q&A, you may be able to do that by raising your hand, and we'll go over how to do that in a moment. Just to note that if you are joining us for only the presentation and Q&A components and not the discussion activity, we are going to be talking about the evaluation criteria that will be used to guide how solutions are selected and evaluated for this study as part of the discussion activity. So if you happen to miss that, a survey will be made available on the project website where you can provide your feedback. So don't worry if you're not able to stay for the full duration of the meeting. There will be other opportunities to provide your feedback after this meeting as well. Next slide, please, Kate. Sorry, next slide. So the meeting guide for today, there will be a project overview and recommendations. Please note that we'll be asking you to stay on mute during the main session. As noted, you will be using the chat bar to ask any questions and then participating via the Q&A at the end of the presentation for a more focused discussion. Next slide. If you would like to submit a question via the chat, you will see the chat box at the bottom of your screen that you can click on, and your questions will come through to me and we will address them during the Q&A portion of the meeting. If you would like to raise your hand and ask a question verbally during the Q&A, you will be able to do that by clicking on the participants tab and then clicking on the raise hand button that will appear at the bottom right of your screen. Okay, so that is all we have in the way of housekeeping. I'd now like to welcome Dennis Carr, the project manager and transportation planner from Dillon Consulting Limited, to take us through the presentation component for this evening. Dennis?
Thanks very much, Zara. So I'm just going to go over a quick introduction to the RMAP and the overall purpose of the study that we've been undertaking since September of 2020. So the RMAP is a transportation master plan that we're undertaking on behalf of the county. And the goal or the purpose of the RMAP is to identify the long-term transportation network that's required to support population and employment growth to the year 2041. Also to address existing speeding and safety concerns and develop a policy tool to provide transparency on how future issues are addressed, to integrate recommendations with other planning efforts within the county, and to neighboring municipalities, and to identify priorities and costs associated with transportation improvements. Next slide, please. We began a study in September of 2020, reviewing the context and the background of the community. An initial round of engagement was completed to confirm the vision and the goals of the plan and to identify key issues on the county roads using an interactive mapping tool. Our initial focus was on addressing short-term operational concerns around safety, speeding, and localized congestion. And over the past few months, we've focused our attention on long-term planning, identifying county roads that will experience significant delays by 2041, and then assessing alternative solutions that will solve the problem. This is the focus of tonight's community meeting and what we're seeking input on. Next slide, please. At the beginning of the study, we identified a vision and corresponding goals for the master plan. Vision captures what the county aspires to be, while goals are corresponding outcomes that support the vision. We vetted the vision and the goals during the previous online engagement session and received strong support. So the vision: to connect people and goods across the county safely, conveniently, efficiently, and sustainably. And these are the broad values and principles on which many of the recommendations and many of the actions that we take adhere to. To support this vision, we've identified a number of goals. It's to create a transportation network with a focus on safety, to provide sustainable and equitable mobility options that connect communities, to be proactive in the planning for future expansion of the county road network based on a complete streets principle that takes into account all modes, to make investment decisions that are environmentally responsible and support economic development, and to be fiscally responsible when making investment decisions. We've also identified a couple of process goals, and these are to develop transparent policy tools that guide investment decisions in the transportation network, and also to create a culture of collaboration with municipal stakeholders where the county So these goals are used as a basis for evaluating alternatives and decision-making, and we'll make that link clear as we go forward with this presentation. So before assessing the future, it's important to understand how we move on county roads today. Like most rural municipalities, over 91% of trips are made by private automobile, either as a driver or as a passenger. While there is some transit with Ridewell and active transportation, the long-distance nature of trips and low-density development limit the potential to shift significantly to these modes. However, they still are important to provide access and equity of mobility options. In terms of where people travel, over 73% of trips are made within the county or the city of Guelph. So the significant majority of local travel. The next highest destination is to the region of Waterloo at about 12%. So by 2041, how we move will change. Population is projected to grow by 46% and employment by 52%. Coupled with growth pressures in the surrounding municipalities, this will place additional demand on the roadway network. This will result in an increase in the number of roads that experience growth in traffic and subsequent delays. These are illustrated on the map as roads in red and orange, and we'll further discuss some of these as we move forward. So what are the key issues and how does the RMAP address them? I'm going to turn it over to my colleague Paul Bumstead to explain.
Thank you, Dennis, and good evening, everyone. The purpose of the next sequence of slides is to provide an overview of how we identify a problem, how we assess the future conditions, and identify network issues moving forward to 2041. It's important to understand how we identify a capacity problem in the network. You saw that the graphic that Dennis showed with the volume to capacity, which is the traffic volume compared to the road capacity available. And where we have volumes to capacity ratio that exceed 1 or 100% of the capacity, that's considered to be a significant delay. And flow will be unstable and longer travel times will be experienced. And it is something that needs to be fixed or corrected. In terms of other problems where we monitor what is happening, where the moderate delays are happening, the volume capacity is under 1 but approaching 1, travel will be unreliable, travel times will fluctuate depending on the time of day, and we consider that something that needs to be monitored. Next slide, please. Then what happens if we do nothing? With increases in delays, the future county roads will experience both delays to travelers, that results in decreased mobility, increased vehicle operating costs, increased speeding on other roads to make up for lost time. We experience diversion of vehicles to local roads, and local roads are not designed for high volumes of vehicles. And this can result in safety issues for vehicles and residents, as well as increased maintenance and improvement costs on the county part. And the third element is increased out-of-way travel, which results in increased vehicle operating costs and increased vehicle emissions. Next slide, please. So the specific problems that were identified in the 2041 horizon, those that exceed the practical capacity or will experience significant delay, include 5 roadway sections: Wellington Road 7 between Eloro, Salem, and Highway 6 Junction; Wellington Road 18 between Wellington Road 21 in Eloro and Wellington Road 43 in Fergus; Wellington Road 32 between Wellington Road 124 and Highway 7; Wellington Road 46 between Maltby Road and Wellington Road 34; and Wellington Road 124 between the regional Waterloo boundary limits and the city of Guelph boundary limits. Approaching capacity by 2041 are experiencing moderate delay. Wellington Road 21 between Wellington Road 7, Eloro, and the regional Waterloo boundary limits, and Wellington Road 86 between Wellington Road 10 and Wellington Road. In terms of addressing these areas of concern, we begin with a list of alternative strategies or solutions, and they really are in 3 buckets. The first bucket is travel demand management, or what we call TDM, and this initiative is an attempt to modify travel behavior, reduce vehicle use by shifting travel to other modes. The second is the Transportation Systems Management, or TSM, and this strategy aims to optimize infrastructure to improve performance. That means taking the existing environment and changing it in some way that it is more efficient. And that can be improving the quality of the roadway, for example, road surface or paving shoulders, use of technology. In the case of urban areas, you can try traffic signal coordination, or providing additional turning lanes. And the impact of that in terms of success or magnitude of effect is medium. And then the third strategy is the increase of supply and transportation infrastructure. Expanding infrastructure means widening roads, and adding new infrastructure means creating a new road or extending a new road. And the potential impact in terms of effect on congestion is considered high. Next slide, please. Now the question is, how do we determine the right solution for each area of concern? Each of the alternatives that we identify to address the prevailing issue is evaluated based on criteria groups. So that being transportation, natural environment. Next slide, please. Now, within each of these criteria groups, we consider more specific criteria. And these criteria are aligned with the vision and goals that Dennis outlined earlier in this presentation, the 8 vision and goals. And in terms of transportation, we're trying to support creating a transportation network with a focus on safety, providing sustainable and equitable mobility options that connect communities, and being proactive in planning for future expansion of the county road network based on complete streets principles. That means and then the connectivity to serve local areas. We look at the ability of the alternative to maintain or enhance capacity of the network. We look at its ability to provide a safe environment and reduce collision potential, the ability to support movement of goods, the ability to mitigate or minimize noise impacts, to support active transportation, and to minimize directly impacted residences. Next slide, please. In terms of natural environment criteria, we're trying to support the vision that we're making investment decisions that are environmentally responsible. The criteria that we're reviewing: natural hazard areas, air quality, climate change, species at risk in that habitat, woodlands and woodlots that are impacted, water courses crossed, wildlife habitats, movement and corridor crossings, wetlands impacted, and provincially or regionally significant wetlands impacted. Next slide. In terms of cultural environment, we're looking at supporting the culture of collaboration where county transportation network intersects with areas of local importance. So where are the areas of local importance and how are they impacted? And we're also trying to provide a mechanism that is clear and transparent, that guides investments decisions in the transportation network. And so the criteria we're looking at here: heritage property or buildings impacted, impact to heritage landscapes, cemeteries that are impacted, sites of archaeological potential, utility corridors, and potential for ride-well or transit connections or business partnerships, and the compatibility with provincial, county, and city policies, as well as the conservation area framework standards. Next slide, please. Socio-economic environment criteria. So we're trying to support economic development, and that means, does the alternative have an impact on farming activity, on local businesses? In terms of existing businesses and industry, does it open up opportunities for new business or expanded business and industry? Are there opportunities for community to draw new business? And then does the alternative support and improve tourism, which is significant in the area? Next slide, please. And then the final responsible when making investments decisions. And the criteria we look at are capital cost, order of magnitude, operational and maintenance costs, and are there any funding opportunities through any possible grants? Next slide, please. So in terms of the problem and the evaluation, the next slides, we will walk through the individual areas of concern and talk about the problems, the opportunities, and how the high-level evaluation, the high-level outcomes work. Next slide, please. So Area 1, which is the Wellington Road 7 between Eloro and Salem and Highway 6 junction. This was previously identified in the development charges as a problem area, and we've confirmed that it's projected to be well over capacity by 2041. We will look at expanding on infrastructure. There is a potential to widen and add one lane per direction, as well as look at TSM improvements. Adding additional infrastructure is more complicated. Opportunities to add and improve parallel capacity are limited, but there are some issues associated with traffic in Eloro and Fergus that we'll discuss later. Next slide, please. So in terms of the evaluation, each of the individual criteria within the criteria group was assessed for the appropriate alternatives that were considered. So in this case, TSM and widen existing were evaluated based on the individual criteria. The outcomes were summarized or compiled for the transportation, natural environment, cultural environment, socioeconomic, and cost. And from that evaluation, the widening of the existing road came out as the preliminary preferred, primarily on its ability to address the transportation issues and the order of magnitude problem. While it is slightly more expensive, the ability to address those transportation won the day for that alternative. So the alternative solution is to expand infrastructure, provide additional 1 lane per direction, Salem to Highway 6, and also consider undertaking a technical study to review the impacts of potential use of Wellington Road 17 and 7 as a truck-signed bypass of Fergus and Eloro on the design and elements of both roads. Next slide, please. Area 2, Wellington Road 18, between Wellington Road 21 in Eloro and Wellington Road 43 in Fergus. It is projected to be well over capacity by 2041 and with significant delay, and near capacity between Highway 6 and Wellington Road 43 with moderate to significant delay. And these issues were identified previously in the development charges of 2017. The opportunities that we looked at here, the transportation systems managed by modifying the existing corridors, new turn lanes, repurposing of pavement within the cross section, expanding infrastructure to 1 lane in each direction for each of those problem areas, and adding infrastructure, new north-south bypass to address Highway 6 constraint, and new east-west bypass to address the Wellington Road 18 constraint. The Wellington Road 18 was previously identified in the development charges study. Next slide, please. So in comparing or evaluating the TSM, the widening existing, and the provision of new infrastructure, the outcome when looking at the individual criteria and then the criteria groups was that TSM and widen existing were both preferred depending on the section of roadway. The new infrastructure was identified as being costly, but keeping in mind we are at a high level review at this master plan stage. Next slide. So the preliminary alternative solution coming out of our assessment, TSM to be applied between Metcalf and Kirtland, and that means restricting parking and providing center left turn lane, and expanding infrastructure, Kirtland to Can Robert to provide an additional lane per direction, as well as Highway 6 to Highway 43 to provide an additional lane in each direction. Next slide, please. Area concern 3 is Wellington Road 32 between Wellington Road 124 and Highway 7. The problem statement is that it's overcapacity significantly by 2041. The critical link was identified south of Speedsville Road, adjacent to the market. This was previously identified as a problem area in the development charges. Again, the opportunities considered, TSM to widen and formalize the shoulders, providing more space for vehicles and for alternative modes, expanding infrastructure by adding a lane, and adding infrastructure opportunities to add or improve parallel capacity was limited, so that was not carried forward. Next slide, please. The high-level assessment compared the TSM and the widening existing. They each had their benefits. The transportation service was better by widening the existing, but the cost obviously was higher. But in the balance of all the criteria assessed, it was TSM and widening existing were not distinguishable. The preliminary alternative is to implement TSM, pave and widen the shoulders, provide localized improvements south of Speedsville, and then monitor the situation for any emerging issues. Next slide, please. Area 4, Wellington Road 46 between Maltby Road and Wellington Road 34. Again, overcapacity by 2041. This was previously identified in the development charges and is consistent with the finding of the specific EA, as well as the Guelph Wellington Transportation Study. The opportunities that were evaluated, the TSM to improve cycling and pedestrian access, bike lanes, to look at expanding infrastructure, adding one lane in each direction between Maltby and Wellington Road 34, be consistent with the north and south segments joining that section, and to look at add infrastructure, the potential improvements to parallel roads, the complication being that they're not under county jurisdiction, but they are potentials. Next slide, please. So the assessment looked at TSM, widen existing and use or improve parallel infrastructure. Each of the criteria groups assessed again. TSM and widening existing came out as equally preferred. The parallel infrastructure was limited by its cost to improve and its ability to address the actual problem in terms of diversion away from the Highway 46 or Wellington Road 46 corridor. So move forward, next slide, please. So the preliminary alternative solution being presented is expand the infrastructure by providing additional lane in each direction. And the evaluation completed confirms the Gordon Street environmental assessment that undertook more detailed analysis. And the preferred solution is consistent with the Wellington Road EA. Next slide. Area of concern 5, Wellington Road 124 between Region Waterloo and City of Guelph boundaries. Problem statement, again, to be overcapacity. That's consistent with the finding of the Wellington Road 124 EA in 2019, as well as the 2005 Guelph Wellington Transportation Study. The evaluation has not been completed because of the status of the 124 EA. Given that the problem statement's been confirmed and that the EA took the evaluation to a more refined level, not a high strategic assessment, but a quantitative evaluation criteria, that the recommendations from the 124 environmental assessment are being carried forward. Next slide, please. And now into the two moderate problem areas. Wellington Road 21 between Wellington Road 7 and the Regional Waterloo boundary. And it's approaching capacity by 2041. It was previously identified in the development charges. We looked at TSM to urbanize the corridor to support cycling and pedestrian access at the east end towards Wellington Road 7, and then developing a signage strategy to promote alternative use of the parallel facility, or expand infrastructure to add one lane per direction. This needs to be considered in concert with the potential benefit of Wellington Road 7 widening and the Eloro Fergus bypass. We'll come to that recommendation about the bypass in later slides, but traffic using Wellington Road 21 may be diverting in the area because of the other capacity constraints, and if those are relieved, we might not have the same issue on Wellington Road 21. Next slide, please. The TSM and widen existing were the direct alternatives that address the capacity issue. TSM was preferred on the balance of the criteria evaluation. And so that's the preferred to formalize and widen and pave shoulders, and then to monitor the situation over the longer term to confirm that issues don't emerge. Next slide, please. And finally, area number 7, the Wellington Road 86 between Wellington Road 10 and Wellington Road 85 is expected to approach capacity by 2041. This is a newly identified issue that was not identified in the DC. So we've got additional growth and we've got more pressures on the system than were accounted for before. And so this is an emerging problem now. We looked at TSM by formalizing shoulders and providing dedicated turn lanes in the community of Dorking. The other is to expand infrastructure, add one lane in per direction, or add infrastructure the opportunities for parallel capacity are limited. The bullet at the bottom there is mistaken in formatting and content. So it's not related to Eloro for Brazil. Next slide, please. So in looking at TSM versus the wide and existing, the TSM on the balance is preferred. So we're proposing moving forward with formalizing and widening paved shoulders and providing auxiliary left turn lanes at the major intersection in Dorking, and then continue with a monitoring program that tracks any emerging issues. Next slide, please. So one of the principal issues is in the area of Eloro and Fergus. We've identified problems on Wellington Road 18. We've identified problems on Wellington Road 7. We're aware of the signage for an alternative truck route recently implemented. And the question is, how do we determine if a bypass is needed? Next slide. And so when we're looking at what's the justification for a bypass, community issue is identified, and that issue could be volume of traffic versus the capacity. It could be the vehicle composition and distribution in the community. So is heavy truck the problem? The safety and speed, which obviously we were looking at that earlier in the study about community issues. And are there sensitive land uses, and how many and where are they? Whether they be schools, whether they're businesses, whether they're environmental areas. So other considerations, are there opportunities for alternative capacity that would effectively serve the identified travel demand and minimize out-of-way travel? If it's not a route that's obvious and not a route that saves time, then it may not be effective. And the other thing is we need to look at the other non-transportation impacts, the impacts of any new infrastructure on the natural environment, socio-economic, the cultural, and the cost. Next slide, please. So in terms of bypass candidate locations and potential issues in Fergus, we have a truck traffic issue on Highway 6. We have potential safety and speed issues identified on the section of Wellington Road 18 between Highway 6 and Wellington Road 43. And we have the capacity issue on Wellington Road 7 and on Highway 6 through Fergus, and Wellington Road 18 between Wellington Road 21 and 43. In terms of the Eloro condition, truck traffic issue, potential noise, and capacity issue on Wellington Road 18 and Wellington Road 21 to the west. Next slide, please. So in looking at the candidate locations, there have been studies. The Centre Wellington master plan recently looked at some of the issues associated with truck traffic. In terms of our road master action plan, the problem identified is twofold. There's a significant east-west travel condition along Wellington Road 18 between Fergus and Eloro, and there's a significant north-south travel along Highway 6 through Fergus. And it's estimated that trips are already diverting in the network, which is putting pressure on Wellington Road 7, which is one of our problem statements. So we have the Wellington Road 18 capacity issue from the west in Salem to Highway 6 in Fergus. We have a high volume of truck traffic on Highway 7. We have a speeding concern, and we have potential noise exposure for sensitive receptors. Next slide, please. So what alternatives are there? The existing signage, signed route takes traffic from Highway 6 along 17 and directs it down Highway 7. Obviously, there are, that's one alternative, and it is not without impact. Alternative 2 is looking, we identified this from the Center West, was one of the alternatives, to direct Highway 6 off of its current alignment south of Fergus, bring it along and then back to Highway 6 north of Fergus, roughly at Nickel Road 15. But there is another, that's still a north-south issue. The east-west issue has still not been addressed. So we looked at an alternative 3, which is a partial bypass, taking from Wellington Road 29, a new bridge crossing, connecting to Nickel Road 15 and bringing it across. Now that addresses the east-west, but not the north-south. Truck issues will remain. And then we have the existing or the future problem already identified, Wellington Road 7, resulting in some diversion from 21, which means more traffic. All of these alternatives end up placing more pressure on Wellington Road 7, and it's already been identified as an ongoing concern in 2041. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, thanks. So in terms of the recommendations, in terms of the preliminary recommendations, the Wellington Road 17-7 has been signed as a truck route, been implemented. Widening Wellington Road 7 to 2 lanes in each direction between Salem and Highway 6 is something, regardless of whether there's a bypass, is necessary to address forecast demands in the future. Widening sections of Wellington Road 18 between Kirtland and Can Robert and between Highway 6 and Scotland has been identified as a preliminary preferred, as preferred over a bypass. But we need to protect an opportunity to extend Wellington Road 29 across Grand River and the east bypass of Anderson Street to connect with Nickel Road 15. I think one of the important next steps is that we're proposing that a detailed area study be undertaken in coordination with the ministry to confirm area needs and the role that the alternatives play in mitigating east-west and north-south issues. Each of these alternative bypasses will result in a redistribution of traffic through the community and may place stresses and issues, create new issues that need to be identified, and the assessment and evaluation done in the fullness of that detailed information. Next slide, please. And I'll turn it back to Dennis to discuss the next steps.
Thanks very much, Paul. So if you just go to the next slide. We presented a lot of information to you today, and we're going to use this opportunity to gauge some of your feedback. So after I go over these next steps, I'll turn it over to Zara to facilitate some discussion of some of your questions. So where do we go from here? We need to hear your feedback, and based on what we hear, we're going to complete the evaluation of alternatives and select the preferred solution. We'll refine strategic level costs for the preferred solution and identify key priorities. So it's a long period between now and 2041. So what's the right order of things to occur? We'll develop an implementation plan, including how things get funded and a project schedule, and identify which studies, which of these projects need to undergo further study as part of the environmental process or environmental assessment process. So that will identify sort of that key list of next steps for roadway infrastructure. Along this, we've got a number of other elements to our study. We'll finalize some of the short-term operational and safety improvements and speed management guidelines that we've been working on. We'll take a look at the public transit and identify next steps for Ridewell as well, and complete the report and present to Council in the fall of 2021. So I'll now turn it over to Zara, who's going to facilitate the question and answer.
Great, thank you, Dennis and Paul. Kate, if you'd like to go to the next slide. Thank you. So just as a reminder, if you are just joining us, we are now going to begin the Q&A portion of the meeting. Please note that the presentation will be available as a recording on the website after the meeting if you'd like to come back to it. I know a number of folks have joined us kind of partway through. So don't worry about that. If you missed the presentation, you will be able to access it on the project website by early next week. So as part of the question and answer portion, we will have the Dillon team members and county staff available to answer questions about the Roadmaster Action Plan. In order to participate, you can click on the chat icon and send in your question to me, and I will pass it along to the panel. If you have submitted a question through the registration, we will be getting to those questions now as we get through the Q&A. But if you didn't get a chance to, or if you have additional questions, please feel free to send them through by chat. If you would like to have your question heard verbally, you can raise your hand and we will take some questions from the audience as well that way. So I'd like to begin with just if Dennis, could you give us a little bit of an overview of the active transportation elements of this study? How was that piece considered in terms of potential solutions to the safety and traffic concerns for the road network, the county road network?
Sure, thanks, Sarah. So the county is already undertaking an active transportation plan, and as we're going through the recommended solutions, we'll be taking into account the existing active transportation networks and the proposed improvements to the active transportation networks as part of the overall recommendations of the corridor. As identified earlier, one of the design principles or the goals was a complete streets framework. So that considers all users. So we'll identify if there's any gaps in that recommended active transportation network as part of our overall recommendations for the roadway structure.
Okay, great, thank you. Paul, could you talk a little bit about how the problem areas were initially identified, these 7 areas of concern that we talked about that were evaluated? How did they come to be identified in the first place?
Yeah, Sarah. The transportation assessment begins with a review of available data, so traffic counts, collision history, et cetera. And we developed a forecasting tool that takes into account existing volumes, existing patterns of traffic, how growth happens in the community, what that means for growth to 2041 on each of the facilities within the county's jurisdiction. So we have forecasts for 2041 volume forecasts for all of the county roads. And we compare that, so we have daily volumes and peak hour volumes, and we compare the peak hour volumes to the peak hour capacity to look at our peak conditions during a day. And then we identify where the volume capacity is greater than 8.85 or greater than 1, and we identify those as an issue. Understanding that we also have, in tandem with that, information from our safety review where problems exist on specific roadways.
Okay, we do have a number of questions that are quite specific to particular county roads. So Don Kudo, who's the county engineer, is with us tonight. Don, could you tell us a little bit about a couple of these roads, kind of starting with whether there are any plans for Anderson at the river where 29 meets 18, where County Road 29 meets County Road 18?
Thank you, Zara. The only plans is what's been shown as one of the alternatives here, this bypass, the alternative to Paul spoke to, and the need to have a bypass at that location. The crossing at the Grand River to extend 29 was part of the Center Wellington Transportation Master Plan, and it's been reviewed as part of our study.
Okay, thank you. A couple of other ones that have come through. Could you talk a bit about Morriston Road and the truck traffic along this corridor and any plans that would address safety issues?
Zara, sorry, I may have missed your question there.
Oh, sorry. The question is asking about Morriston Road and whether there are any plans to address safety issues along this corridor.
Okay. So Morriston, is it, sorry, I understand there's a question submitted before about the bypass of Morriston. Is that the question you're referring to?
The question is asking about heavy truck traffic through Morriston.
Right. Morriston's, truck traffic, it is an issue. The fact of the matter that trucks are permitted on county roads, and as the higher level, higher tier road network, this is where the truck should be. We do not restrict trucks on our roads. So there are no plans to restrict trucks on it through Morriston.
Okay, great, thank you. Paul, we have a question about County Road 18, which in the analysis that you presented was shown as the volume over capacity being greater than 1. Would you consider that there might be any issues with South River Road given the density of South Eloro development?
Thank you, Zara. Well, the scope of the work for the master plan is to look at the county road system. The growth in Eloro has been accounted for in terms of traffic that uses the county road system and where it accesses the county road system. But that's a local jurisdiction and a local access issue, not specifically a county road. We do account for the growth, but we're not looking at the performance of South River Road.
Okay, so Paul, we also have quite a few questions about the truck bypass analysis and the consideration around impacts to the local communities. There have been several questions about concerns in small towns for safety of children, potential for increased truck accidents on major roads. Could you talk a bit about how the truck bypass, and I know you mentioned the ministry would be engaged to kind of further study these items, but could you talk a bit about how a potential truck bypass would consider safety issues and impacts to the local communities in Alma and other surrounding communities?
Yeah, I will start, and then I'll ask Dawn to speak based on past studies. So in terms of the work that we have done in identifying the problems in Eloro and Fergus, we're at a high level. We're at daily volumes and peak hour volumes and where there are collision history and the like. It's understood, and we acknowledge that in our conclusions or preliminary recommendations that diverting travel to relieve another parallel facility or to avoid a specific area will have impacts on other areas. I don't think that the current signage on 17 and 7 was meant to be a formal bypass, but only another option. And that came out of the Central Wellington Master Plan. That is a county in Central Wellington ministry issue. Our team believes that more analysis is required to look at not just 17 and 7, but also Wellington Road 18 and Highway 6 through Fergus. And on that note, I'll pass it off to Dawn to talk about the current signage implementation.
Thanks, Paul. So yeah, Center Wellington did identify an alternate truck route through Fergus in their master plan. Trucks are still, so the idea was that trucks are still permitted to go through Fergus on Highway 6. The Center Wellington master plan was recommending to have a alternate route that trucks could use on consisting of County Road 7 and 17. Once again, all county roads do permit trucks, so it is not necessarily a designated truck route by any means. It is information for trucks to use that route. When the David Street Bridge was closed in Fergus for the year of construction, the detour route for trucks and traffic was along that same route. Our review of the detour route traffic volumes and truck traffic did not notice any significant change, so it did indicate that trucks have been using that route historically, And with this alternate route signage, once again, it's pointing out that this is a route for trucks to bypass the downtown of Fergus. And so the Roads Committee in 2019, February 2019, approved that alternate route signage. It's signage that provides information with respect to this alternate truck route.
Okay, great. Hopefully that gives some clarification on the question. If there are any follow-ups, please feel free to send those through. We do have a number of questions that are around the theme of safety and speed enforcement and what kinds of measures can be put in place to protect from potentially both truck traffic and speeding as well as general speeding. Paul or Dennis, could you talk a little bit about how safety and speed fit into the Roadmaster Action Plan and what kinds of considerations may also be outside of the scope of this study?
So I will take that one. Thank you, Zara. Yeah, so the speed management component of this RMAP, the first step was to generate some standards and policies, standardize the way that evaluation is done and how issues are identified and complaints received. It set the framework for how problems would be evaluated, and we have brought that to Council and Roads Committee. The next step, and it's currently underway, we are looking at what that means in terms of solutions. There are regulatory solutions and there are design solutions. We will be looking at those in the next steps of the study. But they are, these speed studies they're not just in areas where we've identified issues. They are varied, or they vary across the county. So we have about 17 locations that we are reviewing in detail to look at mitigation or corrective actions.
Okay, so at what point might the community be made aware of, or would those components of the safety and speed analysis be shared?
Hey, I'll defer to Dennis or Don on the scheduling of that.
Well, I'll take that, Paul. So we have provided, the safety strategy was approved by the Roads Committee. So the safety strategy is an approved part of our roadmap study. The speed management guidance have been reviewed at Roads Committee, and we've received a number of comments through committee and through council, and a follow-up report was provided to committee and council, and we would plan to get those speed management guidelines revised to the Roads Committee. I'm aiming for a September meeting to get that speed management guidelines approved.
Okay. Thank you. And so, Don, we do have a couple of follow-ups to your response to the question earlier. With respect to Morriston and Highway 6, just could you offer a little bit more context in terms of the bypass and in terms of how additional speed concerns may be addressed?
Okay. Thanks, Sarah. I was wondering if that question, the original question about trucks in Morriston, was more about the bypass, but yeah, the Morriston bypass, it's a Ministry of Transportation project. The ministry just this spring provided a public information center on the design, the implementation that they have plans for Morriston bypass. Both the county and the township of Puslinch have been involved with those discussions, and the only scheduled date that they have right now is a 2023 construction timeline for a new interchange, basically at County Road 34 and the Hanlon Expressway. So that's currently what they are going to detail design. From the ministry's website, you can, there's a number of projects to fully implement the Morriston bypass, but the only date that they've committed to or shown there is 2023. So that's the only information that I can relate to is that ministry project.
Okay. And with respect to Alma, we do have some additional follow-ups around safety concerns and residents in the community who are concerned about the signage and whether it should be placed there and whether it should be removed. Could you talk a bit about the coordination or communication with the Alma community on the truck bypass and truck passageway through the community?
Yeah, with respect to the alternate truck route that was approved at County Council in February of 2019, the consultation process, the recommendation came from the Center of Wellington Master Plan study. So that was the consultation process on that recommended alternate route.
Okay, thank you for that. Paul, could you talk a bit about when we consider what kinds of mitigation can be implemented for speeding? Could you talk about just generally some of the things that you might be looking at, for example, how you might be able to enforce speeding around for trucks that are passing through these communities, as well as generally, would there be, for example, markers or indicators for drivers that show how fast they're going, that kind of thing?
Yeah, very, very quickly. As I said, there are regulatory solutions and design solutions. Regulatory would include posted speed limit changes to align with the design of the roadway. It can include the implementation of community safety zones, and there are criteria to review and conform with to identify a community safety zone. There are radar signs that can be placed in specific areas, and there are criteria for where those are placed and where they are effective. They're expensive, so the placement of them has to be considered carefully and in the right place. There are design elements such as narrowing of the road section, different ways of painting, striping, delineating roadway components. In terms of other more significant design, you can urbanize a cross section to make the environment and provide bike lanes, make sidewalks, make it more urban, provide a transition from what is rural travel into a more sensitive, not entirely urban or downtown urban, but maybe village streetscape, to narrow the right of way and provide visual cues as to when speeds are changing and what would be an appropriate speed.
Okay, great, thank you. And so the kinds of community safety zones that you're talking about would be near to schools and near to other particular sensitive areas in the community?
Yeah, there are criteria for where community safety zones can be applied, near parks, near schools, and sensitive uses. So it's not appropriate in all locations where there is a speeding issue. But we are looking at where those can be implemented.
Okay, thank you. We have a question from James Ferrier, who has his hand up. James, I'm just going to ask you to unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, question for Dawn. Dawn, you mentioned that through the master plan, there was consultation on this bypass on 7 and 17. Along 17, there's 4 fairly large farms, and they are the only residences and farms on 17. I'm aware that none of us were consulted at all or questioned on what impact having additional trucks along our road would cause. So we're just wondering where this consultation was, and it's tough to find notifications through the county and through the township. So I guess I'm just wondering for future events, what the best way to be included in these kind of things are. Definitely have some major safety concerns here. Wellington 17 has very poor sight lines as is. Driving tractors and combines and other equipment, we often get passed blindly on hills. And seems to be increasing with the number of trucks on the road.
Thank you, James. Don, would you like to respond?
Yeah. Thanks for the question, James. The consultation that I was referring to was the Township of Center Wellington's master plan consultation. This is where that recommended alternate truck route was proposed. And so when that was approved through Center Wellington, they made the request to the county, and yes, and then the county is with trucks being allowed on all county roads and the history that we had of traffic conditions on those roads, we did not have a problem with approving the signage to make that an alternate truck route.
Okay, thank you. James, do you have any follow-ups to that? Oops.
I guess we're just, part of us are sort of wondering, since Center Wellington's mayor is also the warden of Wellington, was there not a bit of a conflict of interest there? That sounds like he was the instigator in moving this this bypass along, and then he had the majority vote, so to say, to move this along up into Wellington County as well.
To answer your question, James, I mean, we work directly with Center Wellington staff and their master plan, so that's about all I can say, respond to that your inquiry there. If there's concerns with the sight lines and condition of the road, I mean, that's we do have county road staff here on this meeting, and they're taking notes of I know our meeting is more intended on the large future-looking master plan work here, but with current concerns that residents have, they are making note of such concerns that you just put forward as well.
I'll extend the invitation to any councillors or mayor that would like to drive along in a tractor and a combine on number 7 or number 17 with me someday. They can definitely see that. So, thank you.
Okay, thank you, James. Okay, we have a couple more questions. We did have quite a number of questions come in. Thank you so much for all of those. We will make sure that all of the questions that were submitted get an answer provided as part of the record of this meeting that will be shared. If we do want to make sure that we spare enough time to go into the breakout rooms and talk about some of your questions around the evaluation criteria, what matters, and making sure that community concerns are being reflected in the evaluation criteria. So bear with us. If you have particular pressing questions, you can certainly bring them forward in the breakout room discussion. So we are going to go into this activity now. There are 5 breakout rooms. Each one will be facilitated by a Dillon facilitator along with a member of our technical team or county staff. So feel free to bring forward your questions, your input on how the evaluation criteria should be shaped. And we will get started now and then come back as a group at 8:30 p.m. to wrap up. If you are not able to stay for the full duration of the breakout rooms, don't worry, there will be future opportunities to participate through an online survey. And you will also be able to send any questions or concerns that you have by email. The email is on the project website at wellington.ca/RMAP. We will be going to the breakout rooms now, and they will end at about 8:28. You will get a 2-minute warning to let you know that we are now coming back into the main session. Okay, thank you everyone. Welcome back to the main room. We did have a couple of questions that were in the room that I was in that just got cut off a little prematurely, so I just want to make sure we address that. Dennis, could you talk a little bit about the stage of work that we are at? Are any of the alternatives or the truck bypass options that have been considered, is any of this a done deal? Is there still opportunity for the community to give feedback and for things to change?
Yeah, Yeah, Zara, nothing's a done deal at this point. This is why we're hosting these meetings. We've identified through our analysis some alternatives and some preliminary recommendations. But really, this forms one piece of the puzzle. We need to hear back from the community to determine, is there anything that we've missed? Is there any particular evaluation criteria that's important? Are there any alternatives that we missed? How we've assessed them? So we really need to hear from you, and we're going to take that feedback and then revisit the alternatives, the evaluation criteria, and the evaluation itself before we move forward and present something to County Council.
Okay, well, thank you so much, everyone who participated, for your patience. We are just almost 5 minutes over. Dawn, would you like to just give us a couple of comments and help close out the meeting?
Certainly. Yeah, thank you, Zara, for that opportunity. I was able to check out a couple breakout rooms, so it's great to see the discussion and the activity there. So really appreciate everyone's participation and input for our study. So we will be, once again, as Dennis mentioned, we will be reviewing the input here and how it works with our preliminary recommendations. The master plan itself is scheduled. We're looking at completing it by November of this year. And this is one aspect of the master plan. There are other aspects that we will be taking to the Roads Committee throughout the fall. And with that, I'd like to thank everyone who participated tonight for joining in and taking interest in our study and taking part tonight. It's wonderful that we had this kind of participation. And thank you, Dylan team, for your presentation, and to my county staff for also facilitating some of this discussion. So with that, I'll say good night and thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. A recording of the meeting will be made available on the project website, along with a summary, and any questions that we weren't able to get to, we'll have responses provided. Thank you so much to everyone who was able to join us. Have a lovely evening and take care.